just need to explain why SQL. Why is it that as a data analyst, you will have to understand SQL and be able to use it? And the reason is not far-fetched. Typically, the reason is based on the fact that Excel is limited. And we've seen some of the limitations of Excel. So I'll just list some of the limitations of Excel. By now, we all know that Excel is limited by the amount of data you can store at a time. As far as we are concerned, we know that for every sheet of Excel, it has only 1,048,000 rows of data you can store, and just a little over 16,000 of columns. Even beyond that, practically, whenever you are working with Excel and your data crosses over 150,000, it doesn't matter how many sheets you are working with, as long as it's an Excel workbook, Excel becomes very, very slow and becomes unusable and becomes frustrating. Now, that's by the way. The other issue is if you have a single Excel file workbook, only one person can use that Excel file at a time. So imagine you are working in an organization and two or more people need to work with a particular workbook. The first person to open that workbook will be the only person that can edit that workbook and work on it. Every other person that attempts to open that workbook, it will show an error that someone is already using it. And so you can only use a copy of that workbook. Then, sometimes you work on the workbook and you forget to save. And then you lose all your work, or there's a network issue. And so many other issues are some of the issues people likely encounter with Excel. And that's where SQL comes in. Now, SQL, database management system. SQL is the language, the database management system overcomes all these limitations we are talking about. The first limitation is that database management system can store billions of records. And that's what most organizations uses. So your NIN, your bank account details are all stored in a database. They are not stored in an Excel. Your voters detail, your BVN details, even your university details, they're all stored in a database. And the reason why it's stored in a database is that database is more robust, it's more reliable, it's more structured, and it's very efficient. And then it can store billions of records. It can store billions of records. That's how powerful a database is. Then the other advantage of a database is the fact that multiple individuals can work on a database. In fact, database is so powerful such that the administrator may be populating data in the database and other people will be extracting that data immediately. As it's populating that data, some people are extracting that data. And there's no limit. As long as you have the resources, there's no limit to how many people can connect to a database and extract data at a time. And why we could have, and a very typical example is your banks. Imagine thousands of people that are checking their account details. It's because it's stored in a database. That's why millions of people can check their account details at the same time while it's being updated. And that's exactly why database is a choice. And then the other thing about database is that you could determine how, when you extract the data, you could transform the data in a database and all that. And then the final thing about a database is the fact that there's no if error. There's no hash any with a database. Whenever you are working with tables in a database, you either extract, if the data is there, it will return the data for you. If it's not there, it will return nothing. So you don't have any problem to deal with either a data not there or hash names or if error or whatever. So that's the advantage of SQL. And that's why it's a common choice for banks, for countries, for organizations. And then beyond that, for some of you who wants to be entrepreneur, Database is the best format for you to store your data. The advantage is that it's secure and you can easily back it up. In fact, you can set it up such that it should be backed up some specific time of the year. That's how powerful database is. And that's why you have to learn it. And then beyond that, as an employee, you are not always, it's not all the time you'll be given the data the way we gave you in Excel. Have it at the back of your mind that in real life scenario, you have to go to a database and extract those data. So don't think that the way we fed you in Excel, we fed you in Excel that way just to increase your interest in data analysis. But in real life, those data you see you are working with, the earthquake data, the SONGS data, and all those data that you see you are working with, it was extracted from a database. In fact, more than 95% of every Excel workbook data that you are working with is extracted from one database or the other. And that's exactly how it is. So we'll learn more on how to create a database, how to extract this data from a database, how to process this data, and then continue our analysis on that. And then, in addition to that, before we even start anything, I believe everybody must have installed their MySQL and PostgreSQL. So those two are database management system. So MySQL and PostgreSQL are database management system. And why we call them database management system? Because they provide all the functionalities that I've just mentioned. The ability to store your data securely and effectively. And then it provides that functionality for you to extract that data in whatever form you want it. Now, the question now is, how do we configure a database? And then before I even go into that, be rest assured that for you as a data analyst, you will not be getting involved in designing a database. So there are people they call database administrators that does that. All you need to do is to have that skill to go in and extract that data. And that's the reason why we are doing SQL. The ability for you to write SQL code to go into a database and extract that data for your own use as an employee. And so without wasting much time, I'm going to simply share my screen and open MySQL. I'll start with MySQL. So we want to configure our SQL workbench. So I'm going to share my screen at this moment. So I believe you all can see my screen. So now, what I want to introduce you to is, whenever you're working with a database, there's what we call an IP address and a port. So if you check here, every one of us, our username is root, R-O-O-T, root. Now, for every database, remember I said the database can be anywhere. So in a digital world, the address of a server is called the IP address. Oh, I don't want to go into the technical details. And those IP address uniquely identify what network you are connected to, and to a large extent, your location. So your IP address sometimes can be used to determine your location. For example, every device that is connected to the internet in Nigeria, there's a particular IP address that easily identifies those devices. So immediately, someone who is good in IT sees your IP address, it can, to a large extent, identify which part of the world you are actually operating from. So, in that case, every server, every database management server has what we call an IP address. Now, in this case, your server is on your local computer. And so that local computer, the IP address is always the 127.0.0.1. So that's the IP address. Now, the best way to look at this is, in a house, in the cities where there is public water supply, in the city where there is public water supply, every house has the name of the owner, and then has an address, and then has a pipe that feeds water to that house. So in the digital world, we have similar stuff. So that root is just the name of the owner of the house. The 127.0.1 is the address of the house that needs the water. Now, the last bit which I wanted to talk about is the 3306 that you are seeing. It's called the port number. That port number is like the pipe that helps to transfer water to the house. So in this case, it helps to transport data into the database and out of it. So it's like a pipe in which those data that you extract from a database are dedicated for extracting those data with respect to the database management software. And if you check carefully, you discover that for MySQL, the port is different. The pipe that extracts those data from those two different database management systems is different. You see that for MySQL, it's 3306, and for PostgreSQL is 5432. So that's exactly how. But when you're installing, you see that it's telling you about port. That port is just the pipe, like more like a pipe that enable exchange of data through a digital pipe. Let me use that word. And so, if you want to extract data from this MySQL Workbench server, you need to use that port. So it's only through that port, which is 3306, that you can use to extract that data. And we are dealing with PostgreSQL. PostgreSQL has its own pipe too, and the name is 5432, which enables you to extract data to and fro from PostgreSQL. Now, without wasting much time, whenever you open MySQL Workbench, so this SQL Workbench is used to run your SQL codes. Now, unlike Excel and Word, in your Excel and Word, just double click on Word and it will open the application for you. In SQL, it is not. You don't do that. So I'll just show you the way we usually run SQL script in, what do you call it? In MySQL. So whenever you come here, first time you are doing it, it will ask you for your password. So when it asks you for your password, you just type in your password and then add it to Vault. Okay. And then add it to Word. So now, after you've done this, the next thing you want to learn is that we want to configure our workbench. So when you open your workbench like this, don't worry about the database you're seeing. So what will happen is you go to Edit and go to Preference. So when you get to Preference, this is the first thing you need to do so that you don't have any issues by the time we start running our code. I think you go to SQL Editor and then untick this. So I'll go back to it again. When you open your workbench, click on Edit, go to Preference. And when you click Preference, please go to SQL Editor, scroll down to the last point and untick this place. So typically it becomes default, it's tick. So when you check it, you see that yours is tick. Please, you have to untick it. So you untick it the way I'm doing now, and then press OK. Then after you press OK, I think you go to Query and restart and reconnect to server. So you go to Query and reconnect to server. So this is the only configuration you need to do in MySQL. So that's the only things you just need to do. So the other thing is, when you want to open your SQL script, there are so many ways you could do it. The first thing is, you want to create a new SQL script. you open the plus. Just click on the plus, and then you start typing your SQL script. Now, the rule is to extract data in SQL. No matter anything you want to do, you have to use select to extract data. So I'll just show you, even as simple as 1 plus 1, you will need to use a select statement. So you can't just say equals to 1 plus 1. It will not work. It will never work. So for you to do 1 plus 1, you need to select it. So you say select. Select.
So, sir, please, can you take the configuration again?
Okay. So the first thing, the first thing is you go to edit, go to preference. So when you click on preference, you click on SQL editor and then scroll down. So when you check, if you scroll down to this last bit that says save update, reject update, and delete with no restriction, it's normally ticked. So what you need to do is you untick it and press OK. Then after you press OK, you go to your query and then click on reconnect to server. That's all. And then reconnect it. Yeah. Now, the other thing I wanted to say is, so even as simple as 1 plus 1, you have to select it. So you say select. Normally, you write command in capital letter. It's professional. Select 1 plus 1. And then every statement must end with a semicolon. Then you run. So if typically it's advisable you run it line by line. So in this case, select this and then run, execute on this using this icon. And if you run it, you see it gives me 2. So that's typically how we run our code in SQL. Now, I've sent all the entire material for this module. So you don't expect any other material. So if you want to run any of the MySQL module, just click on, it depends on whichever one, you can go to file and click on open SQL script. Just open any SQL script. So, and then go to your knowledge class. So just go to where you have MySQL. You see, one of the folder is lecture 3, which says MySQL SQL coding, and just select the first material, and then you open it. So that's the way we open SQL script. So please, if you double click it, like the way you do with Word and Excel, the server will not be activated. So you have to first use your SQL workbench to open all your SQL script and then run them. So this is just the first, the most professional way to run your SQL. Now, for learning purpose, this is the best way. But professionally, so I'll just close this. Professionally, I'm going to share my screen again. So professionally, what normally happens is that there are 2 ways, 2 command prompts you can use to run MySQL. And I'll just introduce you to those 2. The first one is your command prompt. So just type CMD and then press enter. So now when you type CMD, this is what you get. Now you need to log into MySQL server. Remember, that server is the one that helps you to arrange your database management system and all that. And there is exactly where you run a lot of code. So I'll just do a general overview today. To log in, you have to do it the way you see it in films. So you type MySQL -u. U means username. So what's your username? We already said it's root. Your username is root. Then the next thing is your password, which is P. So I don't want to type my password so that everybody sees it. So what I do is I just press enter, and then it will now ask me for my password. So now I cannot type my password and it will be masked. So that's exactly what it means. So I don't want to type my password. So you see, that's why I have to just press -P, enter, so that it will ask me to manually type it the way you have seen it now. So I'll just type my password. So if you type it correctly, you type your password correctly, it will log into your SQL server, which is exactly what you see me do. Now that I'm in my SQL server, you can now type all the SQL code. For example, the one I just to select 1 + 1. And then it gives me 2. So always remember that when you're writing SQL, the code will not execute until you end it with a semicolon. So semicolon marks the end of your SQL statement. So you can write multiple code in this environment. Until you put the semicolon, it will not execute. So the semicolon marks the end of your entire code. That's exactly what is done. So typically, when you log into SQL Server, the first thing normally you will do is you want to see how many databases you have. So you say show databases. Please, can everybody mute? Mute everybody.
I love you. I love you.
Please, if you have questions, just raise up your hands. You don't want interference. So you say show databases.
Dr. Sam, we can't hear you.
Who muted me? Someone muted me. So sorry about that. Where did I stop?
You stopped at the first database.
Okay. So we said, okay, you can see the first thing is to select the, you say show databases to see all the available database you have. And then you use the particular database you are interested in. So you have multiple databases in your server, but there's one that you are interested in. So you just select, for in this case, you say you want to use the Wisdom Class Songs database. And in the Wisdom Class Songs database, it can contain one or more tables. So what we do is we say show tables, means show all the tables we have in the Wisdom Class WC Songs database, and we have only one table. Now, the next thing you always do as a data analyst is how many records do we have in that table? And to do that, we use select, count, in asterisks, and then press enter. So it will continue like that as long as you've not put a semicolon. Select count, then now specify the table. So in this case, to avoid error, just double click on this and then press Ctrl C. So you copy the table without making any error. So just paste, Ctrl V, and then you now end it with a semicolon. And then you press enter. And then it tells us that we have 10,000 records. So that 10,000 you are seeing there indicates 10,000 records. Now, the last thing for this particular part is you want to know how your table is arranged. So what are the records in this songs table? To do that, you use select all columns in that table, So all columns is indicated by asterisk. To select asterisk means select all columns. Then you now type from the songs table. So now, because we have 10,000 records, you don't want to bore your screen with a lot of records like that. So what you do is you limit it to just the first 5 records. You just want to see the first 5 records. So that's why I limited it to 5. And then I put a colon. And then I press enter. And you see that I've listed the first 5 records in my table. Just the same way you see it in films. This is what they are doing. So all those films that you are saying that are typing something, they are all going into the database and doing something like this. And that's exactly how it is done. So I'll just stop at this junction. When you are done doing update, extracting all the necessary data and all that, you just simply type exit. That's the way we don't close it the way we close Word or Excel. Just type exit. Then if you left the SQL database, my SQL database, now you are now going to leave the command prompt. So to leave the command prompt is the same thing, just type exit again. And it is gone. Now the third and the final way which you can also do is, you remember when we are installing, there's what we call MySQL shell or MySQL command line client, anyone, either MySQL command line client or MySQL shell. So typically MySQL command line client. So in that one, just click on it. You install it also when you were installing your SQL. So just activate that one. The only difference is you only ask you for a password. So you don't need your username, you don't need all those complicated code. And then just type in your password. And then it goes to that same, you remember the same thing I did the other time. So now you are now your MySQL server, and then you can type all those things. So show databases. So you can say show databases. It shows all the available databases. Then use the particular database you want. So let's say use WC update. So typically you don't type it. So let me just tell you the secret. So just double click on this. And then Control C, just copy it like that. And then Control V. That's the best way we do it, so that you don't make mistake. And then you are now using WC. So now the next thing is, how many tables do we have in this WC updates database? And we have only one table, which is secret users table. And then the next thing is, which I forgot to say the last time, is you want to see how the table is structured. Each of the columns, what kind of data types do you have in that column? In that case, you either use desk or describe. So in this case, I'll just use describe. And then copy, just double click. That's where we just double click and then Control C. You've copied it, you paste it, and then you end it with a semicolon. And then to tell you the structure, that the user ID is an integer, the first character, the first name, last name, code name, and everything you see there, they are all variable character. We'll learn more of that as we go forward in this class. And then the salary is a decimal number. And that 10,0 means it can accommodate up to 10 digits with 0 decimal places. And then finally, no confuse is a very tiny int. So tiny int is has a length from 0 minus 128 to plus 128 integers. So that's exactly how it is. Then all other things follows from there. How many records we have in this table? You say select, count, everything. So you want to count everything from Control V, because you already copied it before, secret users table, and you see. So now it's telling me that there's an error. So the error is that I didn't open the bracket. So I just go back. You can go back by using your back arrow and then put everything with this, press enter from Control V. And then this time around, it tells me that there are 8 records in the secret user table. And then the other thing you could do is that, the good thing about, so which is where I will stop at this junction. The good thing about SQL is you can decide what informations you want to extract. So in that case, let's say I just want, so I say select, I just want the user ID. So you type the user ID, just whatever format you want. And then I only want the first name. So you type the first name you want. So the first name. And then just the country. That one should be okay. So those are the three. And let's say the salary. Let me just say the salary. So you can select how you want your stuff to be. SQL is very flexible on that. And then press enter. And then from the secret users table. And let's say you just want the first 5 records or the first 3 records. You just say limit with the first 3 records in this table. So we want to return just 4 columns out of the 7 columns. Just out of the 8 columns, we just want 4 columns out of it. And we want to see the first 3 records. So immediately you've done that, you press enter and you see return all the result that we want. Then when you are done with all your work, just press exit. And that's it. And then it goes off. So that's a general introduction about MySQL. And so you'll be using all these 3. So you must learn how to use all these 3 methods: the workbench, the command prompt, and the MySQL command line client. Those 3, you must get used to how to use them. Then the next thing you want to do is to use PostgreSQL. So in PostgreSQL, also you need to. So today we're just doing the configuration. So you open PostgreSQL, and then it takes time. So if you see it very slow, depending on, even no matter how powerful your system is, the PG admin is more like the MySQL workbench. So it's an interface. So in that case, what happened is you wait for PG admin to load like this. Now, there's the version 12. I will download. Some of you already have it, so but no problem. So what you do is we also do this, we do their own configuration. So to do the configuration, the first thing I just want to tell you is as a data analyst, since you'll be staring at the computer for a long period of time, please ensure you always use, as much as possible, a dark theme, like the way you see me doing now. A dark theme. So it's a dark theme. So the first thing is to configure your. So the first thing is to configure your. So to do that, yeah, sorry about that. The Zoom is covering my screen, so that's what I have to. So the first thing, you go to File and click Preference. So go to Files and click Preference. When you go to File, there are just few things you need to do. I think 3. So the first one is you go to Themes under Miscellaneous. So you go to Themes and use high contrast. You can either use dark or high contrast. I always use high contrast because dark themes save your eyes. So, and also it saves your battery, especially for those in Nigeria. So I always like putting in dark screen. So that's the first thing you do. Then the other thing you need to do, which is the final bit, is that you go to Options, to Storage, and click on Options. And when you go to Options, on the maximum file size, please make it 500 megabytes, because you'll be loading a lot of data into your database. So you don't want to run into memory issues. So make it 600 like mine, or typically it's supposed to be 500. So make it 500. So these are the only 2 configurations that you will need to do with PostgreSQL. Now, to run, what do you call it? To run PostgreSQL, the first thing is you have to manually create your database before you can run anything in PostgreSQL. So the first thing you do is to create a database, just go to the database, right click on it, and click create database. And then you can give it a name. But the rule is that it must be meaningful. I must not have a space. So let's say my first, you can say my first database, something like this. So my first database. So DB simply means that it's a database. TB means table, just simple like that. And then you press save. And then now you can now start working with your first database. To start working, writing the first code, you right click, go to query tools, and just select it. Query tools. And then you can start the same thing, select, let's say 5 times 20, which should give us 100. So it's the same rule, you must end with a semicolon. So to run just one line of code at a time, you click on this execute query. And then, yes, and then it gives you 100. So you see the result of every query that you run here in this environment. And then when you are done, you can save your script, and then we'll learn more of that as we go on. So when you're done, you just simply save and close. So this one I'm not saving, so I'll just leave that. So are you sure you want to close that quit? Yes, and then you close. And that marks the first overview of database. And at this point, I'm going to stop recording. So the way SQL is, you need to have a lecture, let me use that word, so you understand SQL and have a wider knowledge about it before we start coding. So it's not like Excel where we start coding on it directly. In MySQL, you need to have some basic understanding and rules about MySQL, what it is, and what is the database management system, what is a server. Because these are terms you definitely you hear people throw around and be wondering what are they saying. So it's just good for you to really understand them before we actually go into the coding aspect, which hopefully will be next week. So I expect everybody to have resolved all the installation issues and we start coding immediately. So what I want to do now is I will do a presentation on PostgreSQL. So I've already sent the PDF of the presentation, but I just want us to walk through the presentation itself. And then you have any question? We're not going to do any serious coding today. The serious coding will start next week. Okay. So this is it. So database. So when you hear database and server, what does it mean? So when you hear servers, in technical terms, servers mean something that serve. In this case, it could mean two things, depending on the situation. Typically, server is a laptop, a computer. And when we talk computer, we are not talking of your monitor. We are typically talking of your CPU. And the reason why they call it server is because there are some computer that can take a whole house. So like the computers are Facebook, Twitter, and all those things they use for you to be able to connect to the application. It's a server. It's a very large system. Then there are big organizations like banks and universities that have a very large computer that is used for supercomputing. So they are all called servers. So that's one way to look at it. But in terms of a database, a server is a physical system. It's a software system, that houses a database. So in this case, the server is typically your database management system, which is your MySQL or your PostgreSQL. They all have what we call server. So that server, all your data is stored on that server, but it's like a spirit. So you cannot see it. The only way you can see it, what is stored in the server and all that, is when you use either the MySQL workbench or use a SQL, the command line client. So that's the only way. And that's why it's an interface for you to communicate with your server. Because typically the server, you can't see it. So that's the difference. And then, of course, database is, when you hear database management system, it's the software server which provides or serve all the data of your SQL query. So all those queries you see I'm writing to extract data, how many database do I have, how many tables do I have in a particular database, and all those things is the server that is giving me, is serving my request. So I'm asking for that request and it's serving me. Just same way you go to a restaurant and you tell them to serve you this and this. So you are providing what we call a command to the waiter, and the waiter is serving you your request. So it's the same principle. And then the next thing is that there are typically two types of database. So we have what we call, of course, database is an organized collection of data so that it can easily be accessed. So, but in a practical sense, a database is a collection of one or more tables, typically. And those tables can be relational or non-relational. So we'll talk more about that. So there are typically two types of database management system. We have the non-relational table database management system and the relational database. So now, what is non-relational database? So non-relational database is the one that uses the key value pairs. So the key value pairs is, most companies that use the non-relational database are Facebook, Twitter, and Amazon. And the reason why they use that is because they don't have a table to store all those things, because some people's page are different from others. So the way it is stored is, for example, your full name, your Facebook name, your cover picture, and all those things. It's all key value pairs linking to particular files in the server. So that's exactly how it is stored. See Facebook, Twitter, and all those things. And that's why it's easy for you to check through your data to see all the posts you post on a particular topic and other things like that. So that's relational database. It's a key value pair. And you just store the information that is needed. So there's no table. So the table can go as wide as possible. Now, but for 90% of companies in the world, they use the relational database management system. And the reason why it's called relational database is because in a database, one or two tables may be related. We'll see an example as we go forward. So a relational database just contains a collection of tables. So, and every table is broken down into smaller entities. So the only way you always look at the table in the database, just remember your VLOOKUP. You know, VLOOKUP this with vertical table. So that's exactly how relational database works. And then a column is a vertical entity in the table that contains all information associated with a specific field. So the good thing about a database is that every record in the column in a database has a specific data type. So the possibility of error is very small. This possibility of error is very small. And then for each row, the row is used to display the record of any entity in the table. So the data between tables can be related to each other. And that's why it is called relational database. And this is the way it looks like. So schema is another name for database. So don't let anybody, like we say in Nigeria, buga you with big grammar. Schema and database is the same. So, so the process of designing the database is called scheming. And so what happened is, here we have a database. You see, these four are all tables, and they may be related to one another. So you could have up to 5, 6 tables that are related to one number. In fact, the more tables you have, the more efficient the database. So that's why all your records are not stored in a single table. That's a very poor design. So there's some particular record that is stored in one table, another record stored in another table. So I'll just give you a typical example. Let's say you run a business and you have a website for your business. A very good design is that you have a database that stores all your customers. But inside that database, typically there should be at least 2 tables. The first table is the customers table. So you remember, for some of us who shop online, especially eBay and all that, the first thing eBay will ask you is to input your details. So that details that you input goes to what we call the customer database. Now you can have record in the customer database, but you not make any order. So you don't have any record in the orders table. Now, when you make your first purchase, you automatically get entered into that orders table. But typically what happens is automatically your customer ID, which they automatically generate for you when you register for that commerce website, is automatically linked to your orders table. And that's why when you have issues, that's why when you make purchases and you have issues, they can easily link your customer ID to you can easily link those 2 tables to bring your entire record. And that's exactly the way it worked. So here now, we know that from here now, you automatically know that John bought books. So if there's an issue with John's order, all we need to do, and John complained that he will make his complaint based on his order. Then we say, okay, I didn't receive my book. So remember that in the orders book, the phone number and the country is not there. So what they simply do is they use the customer ID to go back to relate with the customer's table and return John's name and phone number to deal with this issue. It also contains your email. So all your personal details stored in a particular table, and then all your orders is also stored in a different table. So in case you have issues with one of the order, you just simply link your customer ID to your customer details table, and then they bring out all the records and then try to resolve your issues. And then, like I said, 90% of most companies uses relational database. And example of relational base management softwares are MySQL, PostgreSQL, Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, and so on and so forth. But for this class, we just deal with 2 of them, which is MySQL and PostgreSQL. Knowing these 2 is enough. You can work with any, just like if you know how to drive Toyota. You can drive Honda, you can even drive Ferrari. And that's exactly the same principle. So now the question is, what is SQL? SQL is just a computer language that communicates with a database management system, with a relational database management system. And it is structured. So structure means that there's a particular order in which you must write your query. So anytime you want to extract any data from any relational database, you must start with select. You can't start with any other keyword. So that's why it is structure. We'll learn more of the structure as time goes on. So the SQL stands for Structured Query Language. So depending on the environment, most programmers use SQL. I find it easier to use SQL than saying SQL. So SQL is too long, so we just use SQL. SQL is structured language, which is a computer language for storing, manipulating, retrieving data. So you as a data analyst will not be storing or manipulating data. You only be retrieving data. So like 80% of your time you'll be retrieving data. And that's exactly the goal of this lecture. But you should also learn how to store and manipulate data as an additional knowledge. And just like we said, the SQL is a standard language, but they have variants. Just like English. The standard English is UK English, but there are variants. There's American English, there's South African English, so on, there's Canadian English, so on and so forth. Now, The next thing is that this language works with multiple management, relational database management system like MySQL, Microsoft Access, Oracle, PostgreSQL, and so on and so on. So SQL is the standard database language, but that standard is relative. So, and that's exactly why. And here, I just show you how to install MySQL for 8.0.32. It's the same thing of what we've done so far. And then after you've installed it, so that you can easily use your command prompt you have to add it to your path so that your command prompt can easily identify your SQL. And this is the way we do it. Then the other thing we also need to learn is SQL. So MySQL is an open source. So whenever you hear people say open source, it's free. That's a short form of saying something is free. So open source means that it's free. It's free such that you can modify it also. You can get it for free and then modify it. If you are very experienced, you can modify how you want it to behave. So MySQL, as some people say MySQL, but we simply say MySQL. So that's the way we normally pronounce it. So MySQL is a free database management. Of course, nobody's paid for it, and it supports all Windows operating. It supports operating systems like Windows, Linux, and macOS, which is Apple. And the reason why it's very popular is because it has high performance, has high availability. So when it says scalability and flexibility, that means you can increase the data you can store, and it provides transactional support. Sometimes the way database work is that when you run a query that changes data in your database, if there's network issue, it will either complete before the network issue or it will not run at all. So there's nothing like your money. That's why banks will never agree that your money is hanging. It's either it's reverse or it has gone to the person. It cannot hang on the air because they are using a relational database. And also, it has a strong data protection, just like I told you. Your data cannot be corrupted. You can't, when you store data in a database, it cannot be corrupted. And of course, the management is easy. We learn more of how to, of course, lowest cost of ownership. You get MySQL RDBMS for free. And then there's so many online community that you can ask whenever you run into problems. Then the next one is PostgreSQL. PostgreSQL is also a relational database management system. And this is the link to install both PostgreSQL and the server and the pgadmin. And the good thing about PostgreSQL is that it offers a more powerful graphical data analysis compared to MySQL. So we learn why it is. And then the other thing is that PostgreSQL has very high data integrity. So for example, you are migrating from one particular database to another. Companies use PostgreSQL for that migration because whatever you take into PostgreSQL, you rest assured that it will never be corrupted. Even in the worst case scenario, where there's network issue or network failure, your data is intact. Your data is intact. So that's how powerful PostgreSQL is. And that's why we have to learn that. Then there are so many data types that we have in MySQL. So you need to understand the concept of data types. So we have bits. So whenever you see bit, it simply means X. It simply means you can store S bit values, which can range from 1 to 64. So that 1 to 64, you can store data values between 1 and 64. And then we have tiny int. So tiny int simply means that you can store data from -128 to 127, anything in between. So you can store 128, any values, 128, 127, and all that, up to 0 minus 128. That's just exactly what it means. Then they will have small integers. So small integer means you can store data values from -32,768 to 32,767. So the reason why you need a understanding of data types is because some data you need to manage your data correctly. For example, Though it's not advised, you want to store the age of numbers, the age in the column, the age of individual. It's good to use tiny int because people will not live. Most people don't live above 127 years. And of course, you can even modify it and say unsigned tiny int. So unsigned tiny int means there's no negative number. So it's from 0 to 255. That's simply what it means. And so if you want to store the age of individuals, it's better to use a tiny int than a small int because nobody's age is up to 32,768. So that's the reason why understanding of data types helps you to design your database correctly. The same, so here you can use that to store ID in a small organization. When you are talking of people's salary, for example, it's better to use medium int and things like that. So, or you are talking about the population of a country, then you can use the integer data types. So that's just give you an idea of how we use that. And then we have string data types. We'll learn more of this, but we'll just do a brief overview. So char. So char means it's fixed in length. So if you use char and the data you are storing is less than the number of space you created for it, it will pad it with an empty space. Let me give you an example. If you say, for example, that you have a column that has surname and you put the char to be 20, for example, what it means is that no matter what data you store in that column, it will always have a character of 20. So for example, if you store somebody's name, John is just 4 characters. So there is 16 character left. So what happens is, if you use char, it will pad it with space for the remaining character. So that's exactly what char does. But for varchar, it means it's variable. So that means if you use a variable character, which is the popular choice, if it's 4 characters, it will only store 4 characters. If it's 10 characters, it will only store 10 characters. So there's no extra space left that occupies space without doing anything. And then if you want to store characters, maybe, for example, people's tweet or your text message, you want to store text message, you use tiny text to store people's text message and things like that. You want to store text book, you can use long text and so many other things like that. Now, that's for now. The other thing is PostgreSQL has its own. So I'm just trying to tell you some of the little difference between PostgreSQL and MySQL. In PostgreSQL, the data type is a little bit different, but it's common. For example, in PostgreSQL, we have serial. So in MySQL, it's called auto increment. So there's nothing like serial or anything like that. But both of them support decimal. So for you to know the difference and what they support, I've created this to say, okay, MySQL support tiny int. And whether SQL or PostgreSQL, they support smaller int data type. But MySQL only support medium int. So there's nothing like medium int in PostgreSQL. Also, both of them support integers and big int. So this particular data type and the size they allow is the same for both. And then the only obvious difference which you have noticed now is that PostgreSQL support serial, but MySQL does not support it. And then the other thing is that here just lists the different data types like date, time, timestamp, and all that, and gives you the range of those time. So just go for your own understanding to look at them. Now, we now go to the SQL command. So for a database, there are 6 different types of command. We have the data definition language. So the data definition language is the language you use to create your database, to create your table, to delete your table using drop, and to alter the column and all that. And then to empty the records in your table. To use the data manipulation, data definition language. Now, it's good to have a knowledge of it, but you are not likely to use it as a data analyst. The same thing with the data manipulation language. So the data manipulation language. So always remember that the data definition language is the design. The data manipulation language is for updating the records. So to insert the records, to update the records, to delete the records, and so many other things like that. Then the transactional control language is used mostly in commercial setting, like your banks. Remember when you go to your bank and you deposit your money, they use the commit to save that money to reflect in your account balance. And that's exactly what happens behind the scenes. So save point is when you are doing a lot of updates on your tables in your database, you use this save point to save a particular process so that if there's an error, either network issues or power failure, it will go back to the save point and stop there. And then when the light or the issue is resolved, you continue from there. But for most of the time, you'll be using the DQL, the data query language, for 80%. In fact, 90% of your time as a data analyst, you'll be using the select statements. And that's what will be the major aspect of our course. Now, the data control language is used to grant access. Remember, I told you that database is very secure. So there are some aspects of the database that you may not be allowed to use. So there's a particular administrator that grants you what access you can have towards this database. And that's where they grant and they revoke. So when you leave the company, for example, they have to revoke your access to those databases. So they revoke your credentials. So that's what it does. So this grants your credentials the ability to connect to the database and retrieve the data. But for now, everybody's an administrator for your own installation. So you can do whatever you like with it. And then I just give you some of the examples of some of the commands you can write. Remember, if you check all these commands, you see that they all end with a semicolon. That's the standard. So how to create a database, how to delete a database, how to create a table, and all that. Then we learn about index. I think index, let's see. So index just make your database faster. So and that's why sometimes you can easily extract data from 1 billion records in less than 10 seconds. The reason why you can do that is because of index. If time permits us, I'll show you how to use that for a large database and how to create one and how to use it. Now, the other thing is data definition language where you can drop. So in the same way, you can drop a database. That means delete. So drop is for design. Delete is for data. So just know the difference. So you can drop a table, which is delete a table, drop index, delete index, and so many other things. And this is an example of how it is implemented in PostgreSQL. So the reason why I'm giving you both is for you to know the difference. For example, to drop index in PostgreSQL, you simply say drop index and then the index name. But in MySQL, it's not like that. You have to alter table and then drop the index. So these are some of the little difference between the two. The same thing with altering tables. So you can add columns, additional columns to a table. You can add this table columns while people are even extracting data from the original table. That's why how powerful SQL is. And then the other thing you could also do, you could rename a column name, you could modify the type of character in that column and so many other things. So here I always give you, whenever there's a little difference between MySQL and PostgreSQL, I always highlight that for you. So you see, this is the way you do it in MySQL. You use the modify column. But when you're dealing with PostgreSQL, you use alter column. And if you know, even in normal English, is the same thing. So these are some of the things I wanted us to really get a grasp of. But most of the time, they have the same language. So like to drop a column is the same way you write it in MySQL, the same way you write it in PostgreSQL. When we want to modify the data type, is a bit different. So these are some of the little differences between them. Then the other thing is how to back up your database. Remember I said one good thing about a database is that you can always back it up. So for this big organization, normally back the database up very early in the morning. So sometimes you see that you log into your account, you just see one black screen running and doing robocopy and things like that. It's actually backing your database. It's backing your file records and so many other things like that. And then you can restore it. So, for example, you can back it up to an online storage system. And that's what I want us to. So that's why in this particular class, nobody should be able to complain that they stole their laptop, though we don't pay for it, or the laptop crash. If your laptop crash, if you do your backup regularly, you can always restore it back from your S drive or whatever drives you have. So you already have it. So that's a good thing about so you can back up your database and the entire table in an online storage system. So in case maybe you buy a new laptop and things like that, you just restore all your database back and everything will be restored. So that's the beauty about a database. And then the other thing is that there are what we call constraints. Remember, the beauty about a database is that when you store record, there are rules to the record. So one of the rules is primary key. So that primary key means every record in that column is unique. A very good example of primary key is your account number, especially for people in Nigeria. You know your account number is 10 digits. That account number is unique to you. Nobody has that account in the whole of the country. That account number, nobody has it. So that account number is stored as a primary key in the database. And then we have foreign keys. Foreign keys is when a data in the primary key is being used in another. And a typical example is, for some of us who are in the university, you have a record with the Senate. And then you have a record with the clinic, your medical clinic. And if you check, for each of these records, your matric number is common. So the way the foreign key works is that if peradventure someone is expelled and they delete your record from the Senate database table, automatically, since your record in the clinic is linked, it's a foreign key to automatically go. So that's why the way database is, if you delete a record and there are links to that record in all other tables, automatically those links will be deleted. Those records there will be deleted also. So that's exactly how powerful a database is. The not null means that on that column, there must not be an empty field. That field must always contain a data. That's the use of the constraint not null. It means that record must not, that data must not be empty. Then we have default. So default means that if no record is provided, if no data is provided, what should be the default? What should be the constant value? So for example, you are creating a database and you create a column called sex. So if the person does not provide sex, you can say, okay, the default should be female because we have more women, of course, than men in the world. So if what do you call it? If the person does not provide the sex, which automatically assign the person as a female or something like that. Another example is if you are creating a form and there's a particular part that says, oh, okay, nationality, and you're creating that form in Nigeria. If the person does not put his nationality, you just assume that person is in Nigeria. So that's the use of the default. Then there is check. Check is to ensure that the data type falls within the appropriate range. For example, though it's not advisable, you put the age, there's the age column in your table. You know that nobody is age 150. So you can say, okay, in that age column, it should be between 0 to, let's say, 120. Because we know people live up to 120 in this present age. So you can say 0 to 120. So you use check to ensure that any record in the age column is always between 0 and 120. So that's the use of check. And then the last one is unique. Unique and primary seems similar, but the only difference is unique is in another column where every data there's no duplicate. So you can ensure that if your data, so that's the beautiful thing about database is that when you assign that a column is unique, that column will never accept duplicate. Whenever anybody try to insert duplicate in that column, it will issue a strong warning and an error message that you cannot do that. So that's how powerful database management system is. And then finally, there are data manipulation language, which is where we use it to insert records in a table. So after you create your design, you specify the database type, the data type, and all that. This is how we insert record one by one into the table. If you want to insert multiple records at once, this is how we do it. And these are examples of how we do that. The same thing if you want to update records in the database, you say update the table, you specify the columns you want to update, and then you update it. This is an example how to do it. We'll learn all these examples next week. But it's just good for you to really understand how it is done. And then when you're running a transaction control language and you're updating records, remember, this is how they update your account balance. So they say begin, they update your whatever name you give the table, and then they set your account balance equals to whatever is the balance they want it to be, and then select the where clause and then use commit to save it. Immediately the commit is implemented, that's when you get alert. So that's exactly the way it's done. So if peradventure there is an issue, network issue, you use what we call rollback. Roll it back to the previous state. That's why sometimes you see that you do a transaction on your mobile app and it tells you successful. But it gets to the account of the individual, it's not successful. So if it's unable to get to the account, they quickly use this rollback to roll back the transaction. And that's why you see that your money has returned back to your account. So, but they do this in collaboration with software or mobile application developers to implement this. And then the other time, I was telling you about, you can grant people access to your database. You are the administrator. Everybody's an administrator on their own system now. You can grant what you want people can do on your system. For example, in this case, people can only insert and select, but they cannot design the database. And if you don't want the person to continue using your system, you can revoke whatever grant you provided to that person and does it. You can also deny what you do. So after that, the only thing left is just an examples of how to do all these things that I've just mentioned. So please just take your time to look at it. How you can grant privileges. This is an example of how you can grant privileges to individual on your server. And then the other things you can also do is how to revoke, how to delete users. And then the other things is examples of how to, I'll run some of these examples, we'll run it in full next week. I use the select statement to extract data. Always remember that the asterisk means select all columns from the employees table. So you select all records from the employees table. You can change and select some specific columns, which I've shown you already. And there are other things you can also do. We'll learn more of that as we go on. And just to round up, because all others are things we'll learn more, is the rules. So we'll round up today by just stating the rules. And the rules is that every SQL statement must start with the keyword. And that keyword is those things that you see in capital letter, for example, select, from, where, and others. So the keyword must be written in uppercase. And then every SQL statement must end with a semicolon. We know that already. So table and column name must be written in lowercase. So even if you write it in uppercase, SQL or PostgreSQL, typically MySQL will turn it to a lowercase for you. So if there should not be a space in table or database name, instead of a space, you use an underscore, or you use a camel case, like Java programming. Now, string values, in Excel, we use double quotation mark. In PostgreSQL, we use single quotation marks. And there are only two data types that you can use single quotation marks: date and string text. And always remember that your date must always be in this format: the year first, the month, and then the day. and then the hour, the minute, the seconds, like that. So numeric values should not be enclosed in code, because when you enclose them in code, they become character. Please understand. So 0 in quote, single quote, is a character, it's not 0. Or 5 in quote is a 5 character, not a number. So that, because it's in code, you cannot do arithmetic operation with it. You can't do calculation with it. So another example of numbers that look like character is your phone number. You know your phone number, you can't do anything with it. You can't do any arithmetic, so it's like a character in a sense. Also, your ATM pin. You can't do any math with your ATM pin. So it's a character. That's how the computer stores it. So please always know the difference between a character and a number. When you leave it as a number, that means you can do arithmetic and mathematical calculations with it. But when you put it in code, it means you cannot. And there are so many data types that looks like number, but you cannot do any arithmetic or mathematical calculations with that. Your account number, you can't do that. Your ID number, you can't do that. Your ATM pin are some of the numerical character that you cannot work with. And then the other thing is that the select must come first in the select statement. Anytime you're extracting data in the database, always remember that the first word that must come to your mind is select, which must be followed by from. Then other things can come by it, where join, and we'll learn more of that as time goes on. So always know that where is the equivalent of your filter in Excel, and so many other things. Remember that also SQL is not case sensitive. So when we mean not case sensitive, update here and this update is the same. You can, as a SQL does not care. In fact, you can make the last letter here small e to still work. So that's exactly what I'm saying. So the rest is just simply an examples of how we've learned today. Please just have a read about all this. We'll learn more of that as we go on. Use database. I've done that example. Show tables, show database, and all that. They are all things that you just need to know. They are administrative command in SQL. So I expect everybody to have a good read about this. We'll still make reference to them in next class. So that's why I don't want to really go into this. So you see, select 10 plus 20 and it gives you 30. So you can try some of this code based on what we've learned. You can try them in the SQL environment, in the, what do you call it? The command line environment. All these examples of code that you are seeing here. And it's going to give you what you want. But we'll deal with it in details from next week. So don't worry about that. If you're unable to do anything, don't worry. When we come next week, we'll be able to do all the practical examples that we can have. You have all the materials already, so I don't expect any issues with that. The other thing which I just want to talk about is the logical operators. So all means to compare all values in the table, and then between. Always remember that between is just the same way we use it in our normal English day word. So please just get used to all these logical operators and all that. And then we can see how we use it practically in SQL. The other thing also is the arithmetic. Please learn this arithmetic. We're already familiar with some of them, like equals to, not equals to, greater than, less than, greater than, equals to, less than, equals to. The other thing that some of you, it may be new to some of us, is not less than. This is not less than. This is not greater than. Please know the difference. Not less than, not greater than. And the irony is that it does not work with SQL, MySQL, for example. Some of it works with MySQL Server or Oracle or PostgreSQL. So sometimes these last two may not work with some database. So it's just good to understand all these things. And then, of course, we have all the logical operators where you're using and, between, and so many other things like that. So don't bother running this code because you don't have the tables stored in your. So next week, we learn how to install this table and to use them. The last thing which I want to talk in the next 2 minutes is the aggregate functions. You know this sum if, count if, average if that we did in Excel. There's an equivalent of that in SQL. So we also have our own sum, average, count, max, mean, and group by. So whenever you use any of these sum, average, count, max, mean with group by, you are simply implementing your sum if, average if, count if, max if, mean if. That's the only difference. The concat is still the same way we know it in Excel. It's still the same thing. So that's why if you know Excel, you know you are familiar with all the functions we've learned in Excel, you will not have issues with PostgreSQL. It's still the same, like the lower is the length and all those things. Remember the length that we use in Excel. In SQL is you use length to do the same thing. And then whenever you use group by with sum, you are doing sum if. If you use group by with average, you are doing average if. If you use group by with count, you are doing count if. That's just the only difference. And with that, we also have some data expression. You can go and just say select current timestamp, and it's going to give you the current time of the day. So let's just do that too. And then you can also get date. So current timestamp, this is an instance variable. This is a function. So that's the only difference between them. One is an instance, one is a function. So let's just quickly look at it. So what you do is go to your command line client, and then it asks you for a password. I type my password. So now, to get the current timestamp, you say select. Remember, everything must start with select. And back. Okay, current timestamp. Okay, select.
Dr. Sam, it's like they're not seeing your screen. Your screen
I'm
is
not
not
seeing your
showing.
screen.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, it's for data privacy. It's good you let me know. Okay, so what we have here is that you say select current. So now, sorry, let me just increase. So what you do is right click and click settings. So just increase settings. And then what you do is you can change the appearance. Sorry about that. There's a way you can increase the font size. It's very simple. When I was using Office, okay, let me see whether it's here. So you can always increase that. So for some of you, I think it's here. So font size. So for some of you who will be presenting your group work, you can come here and increase it to, let's say, 16, and then save changes. Save, and then close. So it will increase the size of your font here. So that's exactly what we'll do. So you can come here and then increase the size of your, I think you go to the settings and increase the size to whatever size you want. So what we're doing is you can come here and say select current timestamp. And then to show you the current timestamp, which is today's date, 28th September, and the time is 15:12. And the other thing also is that this is an instance variable. So instance variable, you give it the name as it is. But some are functions like get date. So get date is a function. So that's the only difference. Get date is a function. So you want to get date. So you say select. Remember I told you that it's not case sensitive. You can write it like this and it will work. Select get date. So get date is a function. So you must always put a bracket at the end. And it returns. get date, select, get date, and say sometimes from dual. I think dual is a multipurpose database. No database for selected. That's interesting. Select. So now what we could do is, if you have a particular code you are writing multiple times, you could use that, and then it will return what do you call it? The result you want. And so these are some of the issues that I think this code was designed for MySQL Server, but it works. So possibly we'll try it when we're doing PostgreSQL and see whether it gives us the same result. But other than that, I think that's exactly how we normally operate. So now if I close this and open now a SQL command line client, and I share my screen again, just to show you. Please, for those who will be lecturing, so sometimes when you ask, how do you increase the font size? You come here, go to settings, and then you increase your font size. So you can increase how you want it to look like and all things like that. So there are so many things you could modify there. I've not really explored these. You can even select which position you always want to be seeing your command prompt and things like that. So some of the things, some of you can, including your color scheme, whether you don't want to see black and things like that, and so many other things you want to do. So these are some of the things that typically you could modify. So I think I remember, I've forgotten where I've gone to, but you can also show, I think it's in rendering. So yeah, you could change the application theme to dark and all those things that you want to do and all that. So typically the default is dark anyway. And then you could increase your font size and text and things like that. So next week I will have done mine. I'll show you how to do it. I'm not too familiar with this Windows 11, but it's possible for you to change the appearance of your thing so that anybody that is looking at it when you are presenting and things like that is able to do that. And with that, I don't want to waste our time. We come to the end. So you save any changes you've made, and then you close. And then you continue with whatever you want to do. And with that, we come to the end. Listen to them. We want to finish at least.